And we are live. Thank you so much for being here, everybody. Today we are interviewing a friend of mine who I've known for a couple years now, and she's going to share some of the lessons that she's learned as a single mom, some of the things that she's found to make that job a little bit easier or more manageable, and some of the ways that she has shifted her focus to keeping her side of the street clean because we can control the other parent. And I think that's a really valuable lesson to talk about. So would you please introduce yourself and tell us a little bit about your children, like how many kids you have or whatever you feel comfortable with. And just kind of the premise, what you want to share with us today.
So I'm a single mom. I've been a single mom for about 9 years. I have 2 little boys. They are 10 and 12. I have been working with Sammy for, I think it's been about 4 years now. I want to say it was about the height of the pandemic.
I think it was 2020, yeah.
And I work full time from home right now, and I've enjoyed being able to learn what I can from Sammy, which has been a lot over the past 4 years.
I'm glad that you're here sharing with us, because there is a lot of single moms in our group, in any of our groups. And I think that, when you shift from doing something with a partner, even maybe not the greatest partner, but just having another adult human there, to doing it alone, there's a whole unique slew of challenges that come up. And I think when men or women, when that parent faces that, some of the stuff is surprising. Was there anything that was surprising that was harder maybe than you thought, or maybe the other way around, things that were easier than you thought?
I would say the flip-flop between the households. I don't think as a single parent nothing really prepares you for that dynamic shift that the kids have to go through. For my situation, it's every other weekend. And so being able to learn how to handle that, in my situation, the emotional aspect that my kids would go through that transition was very hard.
And still the backlash when they got home.
Yes.
Gotcha. Yeah, we talk about it sometimes in group coaching in a couple different people's circumstances. We talk about this restraint collapse idea, where kids will, in one home, they might feel a little bit more themselves, a little bit more relaxed. And then in the other home, there's different rules. Sometimes one parent is a lot more rigid. And this can span the gambit between one parent has an earlier bedtime and it's like, everybody kind of looks at that and they're like, really, this is fine. And then other things that are really invasive and controlling and kind of break your heart a little. So I'm trying to be delicate in how I word things, because I'm not pinpointing any one specific situation. Because this can happen even if both parents are loving parents. Sometimes just the fact that 2 different homes are going to be different can be jarring, and that shift for little kids can be messy. Have you found anything that helps that transition go a little smoother?
For me, it's been about support, having a support network, which hasn't always been easy for me. But I'd say that is a huge one. And one of those things being for my kids, having them have even just a third party neutral area, like a therapist, for our situation has been very beneficial. So they have an outside neutral place where they feel like they can release anything from both sides, because I feel like with my kids, there's definitely been voicing of feeling stuck in the middle.
I'm so glad you brought that
up. And so that's been hard to learn for myself, how to personally help my kids navigate.
Absolutely. And it's such a common experience for young kids. I start to see it often around 8. That's a very loose age range. There's earlier, there's later, where a kid will personalize some of the struggle that their parents are having. And in a contentious divorce, it is a very common pattern for children to go, well, what did I do wrong? Or what can I do to make it easier or better? And then any little thing, they forgot their homework, becomes like, oh, maybe that's why dad's being mean to mom, or whatever, whichever way that's going. And I think that it's so valuable for us as parents to hear our children feel safe enough to express, like, I feel stuck in the middle. I don't like this feeling, because it's a really important thing to keep in front of mind. Like, we do not want our children to feel responsible for managing our adult relationships. And partly they're going to, in a divorce, to some degree, they're going to wonder. So we have to head that off and be able to say, hey, this has nothing to do with you. It is not your fault. It is not your responsibility. And we, as the adults, made the decision to get divorced. That was the best decision for us. And now our focus is on being the best parents for you. And we both love you, and you are incredible. And then you have to be so careful. I know you know this, but I'm going to say it for the benefit of the audience, because so often you want to badmouth your ex because he's but you can't do that, because your child is half of that man. And in this, obviously, it goes the other way too. Anything that you hate about your ex has the potential for your child to go, oh, but that's in me too. And you have to be so careful about not doing that. And there's a delicate balance, because our kids are going to see our feelings. Divorce is hard. It is sad. Even amicable, agreed to divorces that really move through quickly and everything is agreed on and you just move on, they're still sad. There's going to be sad. It is a rapid shift from that idea you had the day you got married to this new reality that is different than that. It's okay for our kids to see our feelings, but we have to be so careful that it's not being put on their shoulders. You know what, baby? I'm feeling kind of sad today. Sometimes I feel that way. I'm going to feel better soon. Right now, I just need to cry. Right? Very distant from, well, your daddy broke my heart because he just did really bad things and he's just so mean. You can't do that to a little kid. Yeah, it's different. And I give these like kind of exaggerated examples to demonstrate, because I've seen both happen, and as the person who maybe feels scorned, in your adult mind, he did. Okay, that's not your child's problem.
Yeah.
Like, there's these different personalities. There is man as the husband, woman as the wife, and then adults as parents. They have to be separated in a divorce so that you can still go, well, that is your dad. And these are maybe qualities, because one thing, I don't think you and I have maybe dealt with this as much, but I've seen this happen too, where the parent who I'm usually talking to starts to freak out. And they're like, they're just like their other parent in this way. And I'm seeing this trait and it's just like them. And it's like, okay, pause. One of my most common responses is, that is a typically presenting characteristic of whatever age they are. So if you're telling me that your ex is acting like a 3-year-old, that's not your child's fault. Like, your child is acting how they're supposed to be acting. And so it's a little comical, but it helps to shift that expectation. Instead of going, something's wrong with my kid, going, oh, I'm recognizing this childish behavior, but they're a child. They're supposed to have childish behavior. Okay. And then the other half of that is to find qualities that you can appreciate about your ex, which is way harder. It's like, especially the more messy the divorce. Because your children do have qualities of your ex. They will. There's no way around that. You're not going to prevent that. You should not have a goal of preventing that. But what qualities have a more positive connotation? And in my opinion, every virtue has a vice and every vice has a virtue. So maybe your ex, I'm going to just say things that aren't necessarily true, just in general. Maybe your ex was super controlling, nitpicky, tore you down, said mean things to you, right? The vice is obvious, but the virtue of that is very detail oriented. They notice problems and they want to solve them, right? So that same persnickety quality could be, oh, you're really good at noticing things. When you notice that somebody's doing something that could be done in a more efficient way, first you want to ask, hey, can I give you an idea that might help? And you wait until you're given permission before you share that. So it's the same quality, it's just used in a more appropriate way. And we can value the quality while still acknowledging that the presentation of that quality in this other person was not great. That way we're not hating these pieces of our children on accident.
Mm-hmm.
Does that make sense?
Well, and I will say something that stuck with me that I constantly, because there are times where I have a little bit of that lingering fear in the back of my head
Of course.
when certain things come up. And the thing that stuck with me that you have told me is, how old are they again? Like, he's 12, and how, like, you know, like their brain develops respectively around 26. I'd like to think between that time and that time, there's a lot of time for growth and change.
Yes,
and
absolutely.
And breathing into your children what you believe in them or want to believe in them.
And that can be hard when you've got challenging behaviors.
Yeah.
You have to remember, I am responsible for seeing the absolute best in you. I see you. Trauma, and divorce is a trauma. Trauma is going to activate the nervous system, right? So your child's body can go into fight, flight, freeze, or fawn, and you don't know which it'll be. Little boys are slightly more likely to go into fight.
Yep, especially my oldest.
Mm-hmm. Which all of society views as bad behavior. What is a response to feeling so overwhelmed your skin feels like it's on fire?
Mm-hmm.
Anybody know where that phrase comes from? John Deloney. He's my favorite. He's a man. Okay. He used that to talk to his son about ADHD actually, and I was like, oh, that's so accurate. Oh, I love this very much. Anyways, but it's very poetic because it helps you to understand the intensity with which these kids are feeling. So like, yeah, your kid is screaming or, you know, slamming something or whatever, and it's just like, this child is suffering. His skin is on fire, right? It's not this bad kid. And it helps to stay in that place of, I see all of your goodness underneath this trauma response or this nervous system response. Because when your nervous system is regulated, you are an absolute delight. You are a joy to be around. I wish your nervous system didn't get reactive so often. Yeah. But I know you. Like, I know these pieces of you, and I know that what we're working on is to make you feel safe enough and to develop better coping strategies. So, you know, we're not going to hit humans. That's not an option. We can kick an Amazon box. Cool. That's great. Right? Like, we can shift and remind ourselves, I'm going to see the goodness in you that is easy to miss when your body is in fight. And I think that is a beautiful thing to take away from this for all parents, but knowing that it can be extra challenging for single parents of divorce. And honestly, I say it that way, but any single parent, if you're a single parent due to your partner passing, there's a huge trauma. You know, if you're a single parent right now because your partner's deployed for the next year, there's a lot of trauma. Like, it's going to react to these kids' little nervous systems, and knowing that reactivity isn't who they are, it's what they're struggling with right now. That's the temporary. When they're calm and regulated, that's who they are. And that's who we all are. So I think that's beautiful. Thank you for reminding us of that. And yes, so the prefrontal cortex continues to develop until roughly 25, 26 in neurotypical brains, even longer in ADHD brains. And one of the things that, I do say that a lot. I'm like, okay, so right now they're struggling with not getting all their assignments in. They're 10 or 12 or whatever. So what are the chances that they're going to not develop at all or learn anything of any kind in the next 14 years? Probably not super high. So them not turning in an assignment in 6th grade probably doesn't mean they're going to fail out of college. and when you put numbers to it, it's easier to go, oh, well, yeah, I guess that's probably true. And that doesn't mean throwing your hands up and doing nothing. It means looking at it as a temporary problem to address together.
It gives me hope.
Yeah.
It gives me hope. And it also reminds me, like, put a hustle on it. Like, your window is getting shorter and shorter. This is your time to have impact. And it's I've had the help for 4 years, but like, my goodness, I still have some of the same struggles that I'm still trying to work on and heal in myself, so that I can show up as the parent that my boys need. And I think something else that I've gotten from this parenting journey and partnering with Sammy is the knowledge. Like, there's so much education to be understood with a developing child's mind, and being able to get validation, which I feel like is huge, because even going to like a therapist, they have such a different, or can have such a different outlook, and it can be sometimes a little defeating, because you try to do the things that you're suggested to do, but they don't work for your child.
Mm-hmm.
And and I think one of the biggest ahas recently, that was one of the biggest validations for me, was finding out the information of PDA.
Mm-hmm.
And being able to add that piece to my toolbox of understanding, especially with my oldest.
Yeah.
And there's that person that I follow because of you on Instagram, and the things that she'll post educating about it, and I'm just like, oh my gosh, somebody understands me, understands what I'm going through, and this is how I can look at it differently.
So for those that have no idea what we're talking about, PDA is a brain type. The clinical name is pathological demand avoidance. PDA folks tend to prefer persistent drive for autonomy. It's a little nicer. It's considered a specific flare in the autism spectrum, but I also recently was confirmed that it can show up for Pans and Pandas kids. So really, I think that it shows up for autistic children a lot because their nervous systems are so overwhelmed. Not that it is the same as autism, if that makes sense. Because in Pans and Pandas, the nervous system is so overwhelmed. In significant trauma, the nervous system is so overwhelmed. So when the nervous system gets excessively overwhelmed, the child cannot handle more demands. And some children's nervous systems are much more sensitive. So a demand like put your socks on can send them into a nervous system reactivity, like meltdown, versus there's a couple things. One, my favorite little trick I learned from a PDA adult said, if you say, would you be able to? Something about that language, my brain goes, well, of course I would. I can do that. It's like a Uno reverse card or something. And I was like, that's way too simple. And then I did it with my PDA kid, and I was like, huh, that's funny to me. He does prefer that much more. And you have to be careful, because you do not want to ask a question when no is not an option. So you only want to use this when there is genuinely some version of a window of saying no. Would you be able to go to bed is not not an option. You have school tomorrow. It's bedtime. What you might say to that situation is, what do you need to head upstairs? That's the language we have to use with our PDA kid too. Yep. Right. What you might say to a situation where like this is going to happen, you focus on the other factors, not the what. The what is happening, how, where, when, those specifics where they can have some power and autonomy. You can focus on those. And for mine, at least at 10, giving as much power as is appropriate can be really helpful. I'm holding the big thing. Okay. We're going to the doctor. The doctor sucks. Sure. I'm not going to fight with you. I'm not going to tell you the doctor doesn't suck and they love you and they're trying to help you. I don't need you to love the doctor. That's insane. I can't control how you feel. Sure. Doctor sucks. What do you need to feel successful here? He literally brought a sword. Okay. He brought a sword to this appointment. Because it made it feel safer. Not use the sword. Okay. This was actually a couple years back. It was with myofunctional therapy. He hated myofunctional therapy. And it was like, on one hand, it was comical, but on the other, like, how creative to go, I don't feel safe in my body. What can I do? Since I have to do this thing, what can I do to feel safe? And to shift the focus to where he has power instead of like gripping with all your might on the thing that you don't have power over. And that can still happen. And it's much, much more challenging. You try to do as little demands as you can with PDA, but some things still have to happen. And knowing that getting in a power struggle with this child is not about logic. It's not about like coming up with the greatest reason. And they're going to go, oh, but of course, mom. Like, no, that won't happen. This is a nervous system issue. Their nervous system has to feel safe, seen, soothed, and protected. And so moving to that focus, getting that in line allows you to get back to whatever that goal was. So anyways, that was PDA. The person you're referencing on Instagram is at Peace Parents, I believe.
That sounds right.
There's a couple of other ones that I've recently found too. So I'll see if I can find some of those links. PDA, okay, everybody needs to know this too. PDA is not a recognized diagnosis in the United States. It is diagnosed in the UK, is my understanding. But there's a lot of providers that are seeing more and more evidence of this. So much like CPT, a lot of providers are like, oh yeah, I know what that is. That makes sense. Usually a PDA kid will get an oppositional defiant disorder diagnosis instead. And oppositional defiance disorder and PDA, the difference from at Peace Parents is that PDA is when their nervous system is reactive. Oppositional defiant disorder is about everything all the time. That can be very challenging to tell the difference if your child's nervous system is super reactive. But if you can get to a place where your child's nervous system has space to be calm and really see those windows where they're like, yeah, I can feel cooperative because I don't feel threatened right now. That's probably PDA. I have issues with ODD in general, but that's not what this podcast is about. So anyways, that's a little rundown. So when you look at your kiddos and you see, okay, this is a nervous system reaction, what has shifted for you? How have you been able to handle those things in a little bit different way?
Well, honestly, I feel like for me, I still tend to get baited. I still struggle with falling for that.
Because you're a human who has a nervous system too.
Yes, and that is constantly, honestly, in overdrive all the time. And so it's hard for me to stay in a pretty consistent, regulated state myself. Mm-hmm. But I will say that I fall back on a lot more than I like to admit, the tool of when something hasn't gone the way that I want it to, being able to repair with my child. But in the moment, trying to remember how to breathe or to take a moment to take a pause, and to even kind of just be like, I have to come back to this. Mm-hmm. Because I'm feeling really upset right now. and then addressing it. And I will say, with my oldest, I feel like he has like grown so much that he honestly helps me.
Mhm.
As kind of sad as I am to admit that, but it's so awesome that he is developing these skills right now. That he gets to the point where he can see it in himself, that he's fallen back on the tools that he's been taught how to regulate himself, with dealing with the anger that he feels. And he's gotten very good at expressing himself. And it's almost like we've gotten into this dance, if you will, with each
Mhm.
other of like, I might start to get rise to the escalation that he's at, but then he almost gets to this point where he wants me to really just understand and to plead with me, and something about that switch for me like softens me,
Yeah.
and so I'm able to see that struggling child more in that moment, um, than just the child that is making me really frustrated right now.
Right.
Um, and so I'm able to go to him and say, "What do you need? Like,
Mhm.
what do you need right now?" Um, and and I think just that acknowledgement, he wants so desperately to be seen,
Yes.
um, as do we all in our vulnerable moments. And once he's able to fully feel like he is being seen, then it's like that level kind of
Mhm.
starts coming down.
Absolutely. I completely agree. And I think that this is something you may notice in after a divorce even more, if especially if the other parent has a hard time being emotionally available or emotionally attuned or emotionally responsive. And it's a pattern I see a lot. So unfortunately, I can say that most of the divorces that I've encountered, at least one of the parents, this is like a really weird idea. Like, why would you do that? Children are supposed to do what they're told. Um, and I'm in divorce situations, I'm usually not talking to the other parent. They have no interest in talking to me. And so we end up with a kiddo who their need to be seen, at least in this home, becomes 10 times stronger because they know they can't get that elsewhere. But what's important to remember is having one safe and secure and supportive adult provides a buffering effect against things like CPTSD. The CPTSD book, Complex PTSD by Pete Walker, phenomenal book. Um, when they compare people with really similar childhoods, but one has CPTSD and one doesn't, the difference is having a safe adult. It's not the stuff that happened. It is having at least one adult, and it doesn't even have to be a parent, but oh my goodness, how awesome is it for it to be your mom that can say, I see you. You're not crazy. That is wrong. You don't deserve that. And, in this home, this is how we're going to do it different. And
Mm-hmm.
that brings us to that concept of keeping your side of the street clean.
Yeah.
I know that it is painfully difficult sometimes to see behaviors from other adults. And I know we can't get into any of the specifics, and that's fine. But to see other adults act childishly and hurtfully towards your children. And if we can't change that, then where does our power lie?
Mm-hmm.
What do you
Yeah.
think?
Um, I it's interesting that you mentioned kind of the boundary part, because that was actually one of the things that I had been thinking about. Was I used to be very uncomfortable with boundaries.
I
and
remember.
and yeah, I used to have a different word for them because it bothered me so much. Um and I've had to get more comfortable with them, and I've had to sit with them, and I've had to um develop, even if it isn't so much of like, oh, this is a boundary, like it's more of the reflective, I think, going back and being like, this is what I'm going to do. And and the part that you brought up with kind of calling out behavior has gotten kind of critical for me. Is if there's a behavior on the other side of things, like from the other household, that isn't okay, I
Mm-hmm.
call the behavior out, and I have to be very careful on how
Mm-hmm.
I do that. But validating, like, look, this behavior, I want you to know this behavior is not okay. And that is even like if there's something along the lines that falls under that I do too.
Yeah.
Like, that's not okay. I want you to recognize that this kind of behavior from anyone
Mm-hmm.
isn't okay.
Yep.
Um and then being able to have open conversations, especially as my oldest is kind of entering preteenhood, um, trying to really keep the door open for him with communication, um, and just being able to um, help both of my kids be able to feel comfortable to come to me.
Yeah.
Um,
And a piece of that I think that you've gotten really good at is when your child comes to you and this happened recently with a family, where the little brother, the little boy, loves stuffies. And my kid turns 9 in 4 days and he loves stuffies.
my 10-year-old does too.
Loves stuffies.
Yeah.
And I think of this one because theoretically, like it could happen in our household because my 10-year-old thinks this is babyish behavior. Well, in this family, the dad, was very condescending about it. You're not a baby anymore. Suck it up. Stop acting like that. Like very, just very critical of this little boy's interest and likes. And I mean, I can understand that dad probably has fears behind that. Also, projecting those fears onto your kid, not super helpful. But again, I'm not coaching dad. So the little boy is telling mom, dad said that I'm a baby if I have stuffies. And, of course that's sad for a little boy to hear because he's obviously not a baby. And one thing that mom has to be so careful of is not letting that mama bear rage come out in front of that child. So in order to be a safe person for our children to come and talk to, part of that is maintaining our regulation. We can't use our child as a regulator. I can't believe he would say that to you. What is wrong with this man? You are a child. You should be allowed to have childish things. He's so insecure and he's afraid of these stuff. And like all of that makes them go, okay, yeah, see, I can't tell you things. You're insane.
Mm-hmm.
They may not say it out loud, but their
Mm-hmm.
body is like, I just wanted to talk about it. I didn't want to hold all of this divorce drama.
Yeah.
And so sometimes we have to get really good at compartmentalizing, and that's not an easy thing. We have to put it in a box and be like, that mother.
Yep.
Tell me about that, baby. Oh, he said that, and then what happened?
Mm-hmm.
And right now we're just observing our child's experience, whatever it was. We're
Mm-hmm.
listening to them. And they might say, so I'm not taking my favorite stuffy to dad's anymore. Okay, if that's the choice that you want to make, I'll keep him safe here.
Mm-hmm.
And we're going, that jerk, why would he do that to my little boy? And he should be able to. But he is choosing how he wants to manage this.
Mm-hmm.
I had a little boy that would take his nail polish off before he would go to dad's house. He liked nail polish. It was pretty. And I think he used blue. It was like his favorite color. He would always take it off before he'd go to dad's house. And it was like, well, he's not being allowed to express himself. And it's like, here's the thing. This kid is the one that's navigating these two homes. If he feels safer taking it off before he goes there, that's his choice. Same as if he feels safer taking it off before he goes to school, that's his choice. We can't push our kid to be uncomfortable to prove some kind of point that we want to prove.
Mm-hmm.
That's not okay. And so being able to keep all of the personalized frustration, anger, hurt in a box for just a moment, listen, ask them what their plan is, ask them what they want to do, ask them if they have any ideas, all of that. Then Once they feel seen and heard and connected and they run off to play, then you unleash the beast. And you can write a scathing black journaling letter, and you can call all of the names and then destroy it. You do not send it. You do not leave it on your desk for your kid to read. You get it out of your body. And if you don't trust yourself, then scribble instead of writing words. But you get all of that energy and that frustration out. It is not yours to control. Their relationship might never be as good as your relationship. It's not yours to control. And so they're doing their stuff, and that's the consequences that other parent wants to choose, that this child doesn't feel safe with them or doesn't trust them or doesn't feel like they believe in them. And like, that's for them to manage. And we don't know. We like to project like, oh, this is the kind of stuff. I knew he would be like this. He was a terrible husband and they're going to have a terrible relationship. You know what? Maybe not. Maybe this is the one big thing that dad tells them to stop having stuffies. And then that just becomes a blip in his radar. And they also play baseball every weekend and they become the best of buds. And this is just a thing. We all have things where we do something that maybe isn't great. And most of those things our kids get over. They usually don't have some chronic lifelong reaction to parenting missteps.
And thank goodness for me.
For all of us, you know, and so we want to be the safe person. We want to be curious and observe and give it back to our child and let them tell us what they would like to do, especially for these kids, you know, in the 8, 9, 10 age range. Under 7, sometimes they need some ideas. I mean, sometimes older kids do too, but after about 7.5, they're capable of a lot more abstract and logical thought typically. So you really want to get into, you know, what is it that you want to do? What are your ideas? Instead of telling them what to do about their challenges and conflicts. Obviously, there's other things that you're going to have to just, like, this is what we do in this house. But that can be an answer too. Well, in this house, everybody's allowed to play with what makes them happy as long as it's safe. And so that's something that my own 10-year-old has a hard time with. Why? I don't know. It's probably equalizing behavior. That's another feature of PDA, where you try to bring other people down when you're feeling activated to equalize them to your level. And it's usually a sign that he's stressed about something completely unrelated when he's like, why are you playing with those stupid baby toys?
Oh my gosh, that's my oldest. He does that to my youngest all the time.
Hey, what's going on? Right? Back to curiosity, back to interest, back to being as non-judgmental as you can be, because the words are not what it's about. Underneath that, there's something going on. And that's the problem to solve. And then the words take care of themselves. You know, and so we can tell him, hey, don't say that, and have a success rate of like 3%. But if we can get a little bit deeper and really try to figure out what is causing stress right now that's leading to this particular display, then we have a lot more success with getting rid of that display because we've addressed the real root. And we can't do that with our ex. It's not our job anymore. Not that it really ever was, but married people can do that a lot more. You can't do that with your ex. You can't. It's not your job. Your job is to focus on your side of the street. In our home, this is how we handle these things. In our home, you're allowed to call me out. You're allowed to say, hey, I don't like it when you talk to me that way. And I'm going to go, fair enough. I wouldn't either. Right? Like, my little 4-year-old, she did this recently. She was goofing off in my room and I had to get on a call. And I was like, you need to get out, bud. And she's not. I'm like, Kaylin, you need to leave. I need to get on my call. And I'm not yelling. I'm not mean per se. But she goes, you cannot boss me. You're not the boss of me. And what I heard in that is, can you say it nicer? Right? And I said, Kaylin, could you please leave my room so I can do my work? I can, because I'm a nice girl. And then she turned around and stomped it out. And it's so funny. And that can be seen as sassy or disrespectful. I see it as self-advocacy. She didn't call anybody names. She said, essentially, I don't like your tone. Can you say it in a nicer way? She just doesn't have super finesse words because she's all of 4. And good for her, you know? And we're allowed to do that in our home. In our home, we're allowed to call each other out like that. And we see it as ultimate ultimately moving everybody towards this greater good. So setting up, what are some of the in our homes that you have?
Well, that's one of them. Honestly, and my kids constantly remind me that that's one of them. Is being able to kind of be like that, eh, back at me, kind of a thing. And I would say, um, like emotions are safe in our home. Um, you're safe to talk to me about that in our home.
Mhm.
Um, you, I'd say, um, for me, is I'm constantly, in the state of, that's not how I wanted to handle it. It's safe to repair in our
Mhm.
home, take
Yeah.
accountability in our home.
Yeah.
Um, and for my youngest, it's interesting you bring up the stuffed animals because he's fully allowed to be, um, have his love of stuffed animals in
Mhm.
our home. Um, and this one I've had to get more comfortable with, and it's still a trigger point for me, is my oldest anger is safe in our
Mhm.
home. Um, and I mean, there's probably countless others, but um, I definitely think the big one is, I hope anyways, that they feel that their emotions are safe in our home.
Yeah.
Um, and that they can express themselves.
And I think they do. I think the fact that you have a kiddo who can be getting dysregulated and then flip into like, please just see me and hear me and understand me. That does not happen in a person who doesn't feel safe enough to take that risk. That is a vulnerable place to go to.
Yeah.
Very vulnerable, because you could theoretically say no. And he's trusting that you're not going to say no, that you're going to be able to take that with him, that leap, and go, oh, right. Okay, what's
Mm-hmm.
underneath?
Yeah.
Like, you've done it enough times that he's trusting that. So I
Yeah.
think you're doing it.
Yeah. And I still like, I still go to Sammy and be like, okay, how do I do this? And it's especially for me, I feel like I'm such a verbal processor
Mhm.
that, like, something will come up, and I'm so grateful that I still have Sammy as a tool, because sometimes I just need it, like, laid out for me, because I'm so up here, or emotion, and being able to just kind of have it kind of snap back to a little bit more of the logic, and not too much into the the feeling aspect of how to handle things that come up.
Well,
Um,
and our stories get in the way, right? We'll be
mhm.
like, okay, well, I think I handled this badly, and now I feel like a terrible mom, and now I feel like they're going to go to their dad's this weekend, and they're going to hate me, and it's going to be this irreparable damage, and we have all these stories and this baggage, and then we can't even think straight. And so
Yeah.
sometimes it's really great to have somebody on the outside to be like, most often, honestly, what I say to you is, yeah, exactly how you did it. That's how you do it. You did
Yeah.
it. Recently, that's been my most common response to you, to be fair. And you're like, okay, well, I did this and I did this and I did this. And I'm like, done, check mark. Nothing to add here.
Yeah.
Um, it's letting yourself off the hook. It's trusting that you've responded as their mother and you've made the choices you've made and you're entitled to those choices. And one of the things you might like, now that they're getting more reflective, is asking them, if you had a kid who was struggling with XYZ, what would you say to them? And
Mhm.
hearing their feedback can be so, so interesting. Now,
Mhm.
depending on their mood, sometimes they're being absolutely all of the things. And like my kid will be like, I'd lock him in the dungeon and not feed him for 6 weeks. And I'm like,
Yeah.
that was not helpful, but thanks.
Yeah.
But other times he's told me that if I can ask the right questions, if I can ask questions in a certain way, it feels like a quiz to him. And there's just like, pop, pop, there's an answer. And if I present it as like, think about this and come up with an answer, that's too much pressure. But if I can just ask the right question, so I'll usually only ask one or two at a time because he'll get too flustered if I continue. But sometimes I get great answers. And sometimes it's really simple things. Like I remember this one when he was 6 or 7. He would just lollygag. He would not get in the dang car, and he was making us late. And I was so frustrated. And I have 3 kids, and I'm trying to wrangle them. And I was just like, "Why is this a thing? Like this was not even a thing before. Why is this a thing?" And so that I remember asking him. I was like, "I need your help. I'm noticing that you and I are getting into this like push pull every time that we have to get in the car." And I'm like, "Hey, get in the car." And then you're like, "I'm going to go do absolutely anything but get in the car." And then he giggles. And I was like, "What is happening? I don't actually understand. I'm very confused." And he was like, "I don't know. I just like don't want to be bored," or something like that. And I was like, "Okay, well, what is there anything that I can do? Because I'm not going to yell at you. Like that's not an option. But what can I do to like get you on my team so we are getting in the car? Like we're working on this together." And he's like, "Well, you could tell me, 'Hey, Xavier, this is really important now.'" And I was like, "That's it?" And I'd be damned if the very next time that we had to go somewhere, I didn't pull him up close to me and say, "Hey, it's really important. Remember that? It's really important. I need you to get in the car." And he just scampered off and got in the car. I swear, I'm like, "What was that? It's always important. Get in the damn car." But it was so, I would never, ever, ever have used that strategy from my own brain. But it was him that told me a key, a trigger for him, a positive trigger. Trigger just means the thing that makes the other thing happen. That trigger was a positive trigger for him to shift focus, become a partner with me, and get in the car, which is really helpful because I was still trying to get a baby in the car. I didn't want to be dragging a 5-year-old in the car. I didn't want to fight about it. Or 6-year-old. He was 6 at that point. And it was so interesting. And so he often will come up with ideas like that. Now, my middle usually won't. He's like, I don't know. I don't know. Which just means he's not ready yet. And that's fine. But when they can, it's really helpful. And honestly, their ideas are better than mine anyway.
Well, and honestly, I feel like this is still the point where like you've helped remind me like, oh yeah, collaboration is a thing. Like you can actually collaborate with your children because it's still a hard like thing for me to remember, to sometimes be able to, oh yeah, like they're very smart, intellectual, like more than I give them credit for, that are very much capable of being able to help.
Well, and they're the ones in their body.
Yeah.
Like we're playing whack-a-mole and guessing game, and like the actual person's right there. You gotta ask.
And for me, it's like, I think it's, as a single mom, it's so easy for me to just be like, oh, I have to carry all of these things all the time and figure them all out myself.
Yeah.
When my 2 biggest tools are right there that can actually,
Aubrey, I love that.
like actually help me, guide me on what is going to be actually the best for them and helpful for them when I'm trying to take the control.
I think you just nailed it. That when you become a single mom, there is a mindset of everything is on me, all of it, every single thing. And you have to have that story to work a full-time job, pay all of the bills, sign them up for all of the things, find their therapist, take them to the orthodontist. Like all of it is on you. I get that. But that story can actually become a barrier between you and your kids. And so there has to be some permeability where all of my responsibilities are on me. All of the adult responsibilities, they are on me. And they are the ones living their life. So I get to invite them into collaboration with me. My favorite works on collaboration are Ross Greene's works. He has The Explosive Child, which was the first one, and then Raising Human Beings, which was the second one. And that collaborative problem solving is fantastic. And there's so much focus on empathy and understanding your child's perspective. And it's obviously like the E in SURE is for empathy too, like being an empathic leader, being able to figure out what's going on for them in their body. And I think sometimes it's not clear. This is not a one-sided mental exercise all the time. This is a conversation. This is getting in the nitty-gritty with them. This is a walking arms and walking together. And when we think, oh, I'm just supposed to know. Some people think that that's really what empathy is. It's like, well, you just know. No, you might have an idea. You get like a feeling, but you have to talk to the person. Like, unless you're Alexander, he can read minds. But you get to join them in their world for a little bit and really see their perspective on things. And it provides so much insight, you know, and it's kind of one of the first questions I ask of kids, usually over 7. Under 7, it is a bit of a guessing game because they're not as reflective. And honestly, a lot of kids aren't very good at answering why questions until after 11. It's a weird thing. I mean, it's not that weird because it is a hard question. Why did you do that? I don't freaking know. I just did it, right? But being really self-reflective is usually an older kid thing. So you ask what? What were you hoping was going to happen when you did that? What were you looking to experience? Or what was the goal? Or what is your goal, right? And those become the whys, but it's a much easier question to answer. It's a little bit more concrete than abstract, so it's a lot more accessible. And then with that information, then you build a strategy together. And, you know, one of my favorite things that I do with my oldest is when he's really fighting something like homeschool, which he is right now, thank God. But there's been periods where he's like, I hate everything, and you're trying to ruin my life. And rather than argue with him and try to make him see my side, I will get a piece of paper and a pen, and I'll sit down and say, tell me more. What's the worst? What do you hate the most? What's the hardest part? How am I ruining your life? I'm not going to argue and tell you that how you feel is wrong. And I write down every word that he says in front of him. And some of them are ridiculous. Well, I'll never have time to watch TV if I do stupid school. I'm not going to argue. You're entirely 100% wrong, but I'm not going to argue with you because that's not the point of this.
I need to take notes on this because I still struggle so much with not getting in that like headbutting with my oldest.
I just write it down and then I read back to him. This is what you'll love about this. So I read back to him. You hate school because it's boring, and you hate school because you never get to watch TV. And he says, okay, well, not never. Right? So just proof in front of him that he is being heard gave him enough safety in his nervous system to self-correct. It is obvious. If it's that obvious, I don't have to tell him. He'll find it on his own. And holding that belief is hard, but it has been so rewarding. So we did this probably at 8 or 9. I don't remember which age it was. And I wrote like a whole page, and some of them had nothing to do with anything. It was like he talked about like bananas, and I'm like, this has nothing to do with homeschool, but okay, I'll write it. And it was just like this list of grievances. And so when we went back through them and I read them to him, he corrected some of them, which was awesome. And then I asked him to choose, I said, if you look through this, is there any one of these things that you really wish was different? And he picked, and then we focused on strategizing around that. And he's learned so much in that process that to me is more valuable than being at whatever level in math.
Well, and it's problem solving, helping him. Yeah.
It is knowing his own brain. He can say to me, that feels very controlling. And I have to go, okay, he's recognizing his nervous system feels a demand. I need to word this differently so that it doesn't feel so demanding. And I'm working with the brain that he has instead of standing up on high and going, well, you just need to have a different brain.
Yeah.
Which of us can change our brains and wouldn't?
Yeah. Yeah.
Because let me tell you what, if I could change some of the factors of my brain, that'd be great.
Me too.
But it's not possible. So knowing that he has the brain he has, knowing that he's learning how to advocate for himself and communicate when he's struggling, knowing that I have the skill sets and the power to change how I'm wording things, ask a different way, give it time. That's everybody's least favorite piece of advice. Like, I need you to do this right now. Very rarely is that true. Like, give it a second. Just give it a watch. Just watch for just a second and go, what is happening right now? What is happening? What is happening? What is happening? What is happening? And see if you can't figure it out. So often, and this is more so with little kids, because older kids will just tell you for most of them, but little kids, and my daughter's really good at this because she'll just turn around and be like, I am, but first I'm gonna do this. She's so much fire. And it's such an interesting experience as a mom, as a female, to be like, is that what I would have been like if I wasn't terrified?
Yeah.
That's wild. Like, she's so spicy. And, you know, there's time for her to learn to be a little softer. But right now, what she's learning is I have a voice and it matters. And I translate. So at 4, I translate what they say. If they're like, you know, you need to get my bonnet. And I'm like, oh, you remember that we forgot to put your bonnet on. Okay, we can get that. Right? I shift it into a softer language. After around 7, I can say, try that again. Right? I don't like being talked to that way. I still sometimes say that to her because she's decent about it, but I know that it's like not fully landing or sinking in because 4-year-olds are little creatures of impulse. They don't have the crossover yet where their understanding informs their behavior. They don't have that yet. And it starts, the 5 to 7 year shift completes that crossover to where they can actually like think things through. It doesn't mean they don't still have impulses, but it does mean that when you have a conversation and you talk about things and they understand it, that can then inform their behavior. It just doesn't really happen with 4. It starts sometimes around 4.5. But that's why at that age I'm like, meh, you're very small. And that's much easier to do with your third kid. Because with your first one, you're like, oh my God, I'm raising a demon. What is happening?
Yeah.
And we have to remember development. It matters so, so much. So many of these things will take care of themselves as we hold ourselves to that high standard. Like, I'm not going to sass back at you. I'm an adult and I speak respectfully. So I will respond to you respectfully. And then they learn, oh, adults speak respectfully. I'm going to speak respectfully. And there's still a little bit of it, but you know, the most sassy that she ever is the last thing at night when she's freaking exhausted and transitions are hard for her. Nervous system, right? It all comes around and around and around and around, you know? So me being like, well, I'm not getting your bonnet until you say it nicely. What am I proving precisely? Like, that I'm just as stubborn as she is? I don't need to prove that. I am, but I don't need and so you know, quite often I will be able to just rephrase it, and sometimes she'll say something then, other times I'll get it and she's like, thank you, Mommy. And I'm like, aw, she's soft again. You know, she just felt a little spicy for a minute, and we all have spicy minutes.
Well, and I will say too, like, that brings me, like, reminds me with my boys, like, I am kind of grateful in the sense of that I have had to repair, because now my boys have gotten in a good routine of where they know that they may have responded in a way or talked to me in a way that wasn't kind and respectful, and then they come back around and they'll come to me and they'll be like, I'm sorry, Mom. Like, I know that wasn't okay.
That's my favorite part. When they
Yeah.
start self-repairing, like they
Mhm.
choose on their own to come and repair because they value the relationship and they value you, and you've modeled that over and 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 over. That is my absolute favorite. And it is a skill set that many adults do not have. So if I'm raising kids that are sometimes spicy, right? But the consequence of that is that they know how to repair, they take ownership and accountability, they're willing to be vulnerable, they can conceptualize their impact on others, they know how to problem solve, they know how to have hard conversations. I'll take spicy for all that payoff. I'll take spicy any day.
Yeah.
You know? So
Yeah.
Oh, I love this. All right, we're at an hour, so we're going to let our lovely viewers head off for their Sunday shenanigans. But thank you so much for being here. It's been wonderful. I love to see how much you've grown. I love that those boys have you. And I just think it's wonderful to hear your voice in this conversation because I think it represents a lot of moms and a lot of the things that single moms go through.
Yeah. Thanks for having me. And I'm so grateful for Sammy. She's been transformational for our family.
So much love.
Yes.
You have a
Thank you,
great
Sammy.
rest of your weekend, hun.
You too.
Bye.
Bye.